Okay, hi. I'm Casey. I'm with Google, and I'll be moderating. We have 4 amazing panelists here today to talk about decentralized storage, and we have about 20 minutes. So let's start with intros. Liz, do you mind kicking us off?
Sure. I'm Liz Steininger. I'm CEO of Least Authority. We do security audits and secure cloud storage.
Hey, I work at Storage Labs as an engineer. Yeah.
My name is James Prestwich. I co-founded Storage Labs back in 2014. Right now, I'm the CEO of Summa.
Hi, my name is Greg Osuri. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Overclock Labs, the company behind Akash.network.
Awesome. So to start off, to make sure we're all on the same page here, I'd love to chat about how you guys think about decentralizing storage. There's a lot of layers to this. I think people think about it very differently. So if we could start there, that'd be great.
Sorry, what was the question?
I can start. Decentralized storage for me is a storage mechanism that's politically decentralized, physically decentralized, but logically centralized. So the idea is that may or may not, maybe one node or multiple nodes having your data, multiple copies of your data, or a single copy, but spread across different nodes. So there's no way you can lose this data, and it's highly fault tolerant and highly available.
I think that the most important aspect of decentralization for storage is decentralization of control, so that there's not one central repository with all of your information that can read everything about you. Is giving the users a little more control over their data, decentralizing control of what you're storing.
When I think of decentralized storage, I try to think of it in the different layers of how storage works. That we have data that is stored at rest. We have data that's in transit as it's getting to the storage or leaving the storage. And then we also have data that's being processed while it's in storage. And so I think about the different levels of decentralization that we can do at those points.
Yeah, like talking about the different layers, there's an interesting problem where when you store pieces of data out in the network, you have to keep track of where those locations are. And then it's sort of like the treasure, if you bury treasures, oh, there's a bird over there. If you bury treasures all over the earth and then you have a map that describes where it's at, if your map is centralized, then your strategy for decentralizing all of your treasures is at risk because your map could be easily destroyed. So it's equally important to decentralize the map that describes where all the data is as it is the data itself.
Yeah, when it comes to security, there is this single point of failure that you get when you have centralization like that. And so I think that that's something, when we're talking about decentralized storage, we should also think about, is there any point in this whole process of dealing with the data that is centralized, and then that could potentially be a security risk in terms of single points of failure.
Okay, so is that the why here? Is it the security? I guess what I'm asking is, why are you guys each working on this? Why does decentralizing storage matter to you?
Yeah, so I think it is about security. And I think what James is saying about giving control to the user about how their data is being, where it's located, yeah.
Well, it's security and ownership, I think. We all know what happened when your data is centralized with Facebook. There's no auditability. There's nothing going on. But it's your data, right? So I think decentralization is key here for future society.
So it sounds like we all agree here. Control, security. Are we done with the panel?
Well, I would take it even one step further. For me personally, it's also about people's right to privacy. I try to think about privacy in terms of my freedom to be able to selectively disclose information to people at my own choosing, and this is how I define controlling my data. And so, yeah, I'd like to think of it even in terms of this personal ability to be who I want to be in situations.
Awesome. So moving more on the technical side, since we're at a blockchain conference, how are you guys each utilizing blockchain technology today in your infrastructure, and what are the bottlenecks?
For us, we are a decentralized cloud infrastructure marketplace. So this is Akash is where you procure your infrastructure, you deploy, and you settle. So there are three pieces of the puzzle: procurement, deployment, and settlement. We use blockchain for procurement as an open marketplace. It's a bid and ask process. Whereas the deployment is off-chain. We can't really use blockchain per se because of performance, security, whole lot of reasons. Having said that, we don't really do decentralized storage. We do block storage. And our applications tend to have different use cases when it comes to how we use storage. For us, block storage was important because we need to perform atomic operations on the files. Whereas decentralization of the storage comes really in the procurement, in the blockchain layer, right? So that's how we use blockchain.
Yeah, okay, so right now at Storage Labs, we're primarily using a blockchain, specifically Ethereum blockchain, to make payments to people who are storing data. It's often sometimes confused that the data is actually stored on the blockchain. This isn't the case. Now, there's an interesting point there, and the reason why, hey, why wouldn't you do that? And I think it's probably pretty clear that there's scalability issues. And I was kind of, and as I was mentioning earlier a little bit about the map, the treasure map. I think the scaling of blockchains is very related to using a blockchain or decentralized systems for storage. Because if you can achieve a scalable blockchain that truly has, like, the more nodes you add, the more capacity it has, then your network is limited by the size, and so therefore you can store arbitrary amounts of data so long as the network can support it. Yep.
Yeah. To echo your point, like, you really can't store things on chain. It's incredibly expensive, and to be upfront, the world does not need a public, permanent, immutable record of my vacation photos. It's just not a good idea. The chains can't scale up to store all of our vacation photos, and they should not. So generally, I think the approach a lot of these projects take is to store things off-chain and anchor things on-chain. Use the chain for payment rails and for securing off-chain relationships and contracts for storage.
And speaking of storing things on-chain, that's actually probably not a good idea on multiple levels. We're seeing the general data protection regulation in Europe and the right to be forgotten. So there's a collision course, some people call it, but there is going to be an issue there in terms of the immutability of storing data on blockchain. So just to mention that here, that there's like regulation issues when it comes to the security of data too on these chains. So yeah, we're not storing data on a chain.
Yeah, James, you also bring up a good point with that not everything should be stored. So can you just expand upon that a little bit? How are you thinking through what should and shouldn't be stored?
Well, when we're talking about a lot of these decentralized file object block storage systems, you can store everything, just not on chain. I can store my vacation photos out there in the cloud. If I want to, I could use storage or Saya and anchor it to a blockchain out there somewhere and have a record on chain of what I stored off chain. I probably won't do that right now because the interfaces are a bit difficult to use. But in the future, if we summarize enough, we could have records on chain of all these things. Right now, I don't store a lot. I make like some text files and put them on GitHub. So
I think you brought up what you want to store, and I think that's also something that we should be thinking about actively within the decentralized storage space or solutions, is to think about how people are actually going to want to use this, and what benefit do blockchains give them when it comes to data storage. And so we need to care about the security and the privacy aspects, but we also need to figure out why do people want to even do this. And so I think that's one of the things that I would like to see us more discussing in this community is, yeah, the use cases.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, you can talk about private blockchains. For me, blockchain is a public record. I mean, sure, there are permission blockchains, but let's leave that out of the discussion. So, in an open and public database, what would you want to store? I mean, you can encrypt the data, but it really comes down to what do you want to store, like land records, medical records. You can encrypt them. It's really, the use case for blockchain is accessibility to anyone with a chain with minimal effort, right? Or a standard interface to access this data. So what do you want to store on the chain is something that you want to share with folks, and yeah, that's how I look at it.
Yeah, something you want to share with people, or something that you really, really want to stick around forever.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction for us to make, I think, in these conversations too. So that, is it a public chain? Is it a permission chain? Things like that to differentiate. And so there's going to be different desires, but yeah, I could see that helping.
Liz, you mentioned usability, and it's important to be thinking through how people are going to be wanting to use this. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you have any ideas of, let's say, even just 2 years out, how this technology is going to be used?
Oh my gosh, 2 years is such a long time in this world. And I can't even begin to guess what's going to happen in 2 years, but I do think that when it comes to data storage, it feels like we'll see like the killer solution or the use case that's going to be something that isn't necessarily obviously about the data storage, that it's going to be something that's like more of a utility in how we do it. But we also, to the earlier points of that, the scalability issues and stuff, I think that we should be focusing on how we're going to improve those types of things so that we can do the transactions with data and the processing on a broader scale, so that the storage can be better integrated.
I guess we got to think about a few different kinds of usability. We've been focusing mostly on how this impacts individuals. Like, we've been talking about GDPR, we've been talking about my vacation photos. But a lot of this, decentralized storage systems are going to be accessed primarily by application developers and not by individuals directly. So we have to think about, while we're building like this base layer that we expect others to build on top of, how is our base layer going to impact the users 2 levels above us, and how do we put a solid foundation there to preserve privacy?
I think the privacy aspect is an interesting thing, where like the usability, oftentimes security and convenience are at war with each other. But I think you can have some place in between where you can have the convenience of having your data accessible across multiple devices, but then it can also be secure. And I think that, in terms of usability, I think that's what a lot of this is about, is not necessarily protecting your data, but having your data convenient, but also, reasonably secure.
Yeah, finding the right trade-offs. How
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need to think about the individual use cases and how what that individual might want or company might want to particularly trade off for that use case, because they're going to have to make some decisions. And thinking that we can make a storage solution that works in every case, I think, is really a big, bold dream. And maybe we'll get there, but in the interim, we should focus on one thing, maybe.
Right. So if you look at usability and UI, user interfaces in decentralized systems, they're hard because, well, I mean, you're writing and reading from the chain. Depending on what chain, it's really slow, right? So I think it's going to be a combination of centralized systems and decentralized systems. Look at Coinbase, centralized, whereas Bitcoin is not, right? So.
Are you marketing Coinbase?
What?
Are you marketing Coinbase?
I think they have a great user interface. They did a good job at it. But then again, it's risky, right? I mean, they're storing your keys, and they're storing your passwords, and they're storing your things. And so that's what we have today. We can do much better, but it's really, really hard. I think that's going to be a big, huge topic for the next few years.
Greg, do you think that's it for, let's say, one thing, just one thing you want to see happen in just this single year? Is that it for you?
Oh, God. Where do I start? Well, I like to see regulation. Not legislation. In fact, regulators can't do anything without legislation. A lot of us are taking a lot of a lot of us are doing a lot of work. I testified in front of the assembly 2 days ago on the first ever blockchain law ever introduced in the state of California. I really like to see some legislation around blockchain and this new economy. It's very, very important. That's my #1 priority, because if you get that out of the way, I think US is a cradle of innovation. So second thing I like to see is highly scalable systems. I think that a lot of work is being done there in terms of solving scalability. And of course, Bitcoin, the proof of work, was the first use case, first system. But we haven't yet seen anything come out that strong in terms of scalable storage. So that's high performance storage more than scalable storage, right? So I like to see there, and usability is another area I like to see. Yeah.
What about for the rest of the panel? What's the one thing you're hoping to happen just in the next 9 months in the decentralized storage space?
The next 9 months in this space?
Yeah.
I'd like to see one of these companies that we're talking about, besides least authority, so storage, Saya, Filecoin, MadeSafe, someone bring a reasonable product to market that is compelling and usable. There's been a lot of promises for years, and there's not any products out there besides least authority, besides Tahoe.
Yeah, I'd add to that. I think one of the big problems that I've been working on while I've been at Storage Labs has been trying to create reliability out of unreliable resources. And data loss is still a big thing, even for a lot of these decentralized networks. And it's a complicated problem that has lots of trade-offs where, like in the case of Saya, I think you have to run a node at least every 15 days. You have to renew your contracts, and then you have to run your node also to reduce some of the recovery. So there are some like the qualities there that are to keep your data around. And I think solving that problem of data loss in a way that doesn't require interaction with the network would be great to see.
This is such a tough question, but I think in the next 9 months, I would like to see, yeah, I agree with everything that everybody said so far, but I would like to see us really continue to look back at what's been done in the decentralized storage space, because to think in a broader picture that decentralized storage is a problem that people have been working on since before blockchains became popular. And it would be good to look back and see what problems we've solved, look at the research, see the difficult problems that we need to be focusing on, and collectively work together to work on some of these problems, and and get stuff out to people and experiment a little bit more with the products too, and figure out what those little steps are, because it's great for us to have big visions that we want to all achieve in like 5 years, but we really do need to start delivering things in the short term and figuring out like what really connects with people in the masses, and how do we communicate and package these things, and yeah.
Yeah, if you can see a Dropbox in the next 9 months, I'll be happy. That's decentralized.
Cool, let's do it. Okay, so I think we're just wrapping up. As a final question, if the audience walks away knowing one thing about decentralized storage, what should that be?
Own your data.
For me, like, there's a lot more to do. We're really early in this.
It's not ready yet.
How do I follow that? It's not ready yet, but but you should still want it.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.